All right, I am thrilled to be joined on Bad Faith today for the first time by Anya Parampil. You probably know her as a journalist from the Grayzone. She's also the author of a forthcoming book called Corporate Coup. She is based in Washington, D.C. She specializes in some foreign policy issues and recently got back from South Africa, where she was reporting on the BRICS conference there. Welcome to Bad Faith, Anya.
Thanks for having me, Brianna. It's nice to be here.
I'm so glad. I was telling you before we started rolling that I've been craving some feminine energy. So on top of all your many qualifications, I'm very glad to be talking to you today. The audience knows that I've been on a hunt to diversify the panels that we have on here sometimes. So before we get into what's been going on with BRICS, which I find to be fascinating, I wanted to get your read on some of the foreign policy hot takes that have been coming specifically out of the right side of the aisle these days, largely because we just had the GOP debate and it was an opportunity for people to distinguish themselves from each other. I saw on Twitter you were opining on some of Vivek Ramaswamy's foreign policy takes. Specifically, he has kind of broken out from the crowd because he is willing to say things that are orthogonal to what the blob consensus is on foreign policy matters, specifically saying that he supports strategic clarity with respect to Taiwan and China, as opposed to strategic ambiguity, saying that we absolutely will defend Taiwan against any Chinese aggression up until we are chips independent from Taiwan.
You've also talked about staying as a force, a deterrent force in the Taiwan Strait, putting more military in until you said we would be independent on superconductors in 2028. And at that point, we should pull out and Taiwan would be on its own. Let me play for you what Nikki Haley has said about what you've said about our allies.
That's not what I've said, but you can play Nikki Haley's lies.
You said you said that we should send destroyers through the Taiwan Strait once a week, keep ramping up naval deployments in the South China Sea to essentially deter China from trying to take over Taiwan until we have achieved semiconductor independence by the end of your first term in 2028.
At which point,
it would no longer be in our self-interest to
resume.
Stop China. Is that the way the U.S. under President Ramaswamy would treat allies?
I will give you word for word what I said, at which point we will resume our position of strategic ambiguity, which, Andrea, I will remind you, is our position towards Taiwan today. The U.S., neither party even recognizes Taiwan as a nation right now. Both parties embrace the one China policy as we speak.
With the position
that's a good thing, because then you would know that what I've said.
But that position does not deal with
I'm the only presidential candidate, Andrea. I'm the only presidential candidate who has said we will defend Taiwan. Nobody's had the courage to say it. And then I've said after we achieve semiconductor independence, we will resume our current posture of strategic ambiguity.
Which is
and so I think it's important we have these debates honestly.
Yeah, 2028
That is correct, which is exactly what it is today.
And there has been a lot of back and forth as to whether or not he really represents a genuinely anti-war candidacy, given the escalatory implications of saying that even in the short term, you would be willing to defend Taiwan against any Chinese incursion. What's your Vivek Ramaswamy take?
The reason I've started kind of paying attention to Vivek Ramaswamy is, I think, for the same reason that many people have, which is he's clearly within the Republican camp that's not Trump, emerged as the forerunner. I don't know about you, but I noticed that he's promoted constantly in my Twitter feed, even though I don't really follow him, but I see him everywhere. So that kind of caught my eye. And then the way that all of the candidates ganged up on him at the debate, and polls that have shown since the debate that he's this emerging force, catching DeSantis and all of these ridiculous candidates by surprise, I started to pay more attention to what he was saying. And it's true, he's adopted Trump's rhetoric on certain issues. He's saying he's willing to negotiate with Russia to end the war in Ukraine. He's saying that he would end U.S. material and financial support for the war in Ukraine. And he has these millennial hot takes, kind of adopts this posture where he's an alternative. Kind of, I've seen him compared to Andrew Yang. I think that's a fair comparison in terms of his style and energy. But then he comes out with these absurd comments that are in a lot of ways, if you pay attention from in my view, more dangerous even than what the Biden administration or some of the Republicans that he's challenging are bringing to the table. And that's specifically, he says that he's going to negotiate a resolution to the Ukraine conflict by telling Putin that he has to end his strategic partnership with China.
Mm-hmm.
Andrea, you conveniently left out the most important part of the deal, which is what the United States wins out of it. That would only be conditioned on Vladimir Putin exiting his military alliance with China. The Russia-China military alliance is the single greatest threat that the United States faces today.
Excuse me, that would be conditioned, you said, on Russia containing control of the land he has grabbed. So China is a whole other question.
Yes.
Let's move on.
So there's a deal.
Let's move on
it's
to
not.
China.
It's not, Andrea. 1 second. This is really important to understand. I've proposed a deal. There are two sides to the deal. Exit the military partnership with China. That's a crucial part of the deal that I would do.
And he also said that his model for a Ukraine peace agreement is the armistice that came out at the end of the Korean War, which actually, it's tough to get those words right. There was no end to the Korean War. The Korean War still is technically hot to this day. And it's exactly why we see tension on the peninsula, where for a while, North Korea testing missiles or posturing with South Korea was a hot story in the United States. It was one of the focuses of the Trump presidency, and that is because there was never a peace agreement. There was no official cessation to hostilities in Korea. So for him to point to that as a model, I thought was strange, on top of the fact that it's a non-starter to say that his plan for peace is to peel Russia away from China, because that's not happening.
Yeah, I saw you tweeting that, that it's just deeply implausible given where we are politically that simply ending the war in Ukraine would be sufficient to make to break up the cozy love affair. I don't mean to characterize it in a weird way, but to break up the relationship between Russia and China. I think you screen grabbed a news article in which I think it was Putin that had referred to Xi as like his best friend, and that it was, you seem to think it was naive at the very least for him to think that that would be an outcome of his strategy there.
Yeah, I think if a U.S. official told Putin or any Russian official that they had to end their strategic partnership with China, I mean, first of all, you're already violating the basic terms of what should be multilateral or bilateral exchange. You don't tell another country what their policy is with regard to another sovereign state. You're already acting like a imperialist colonial figure stuck in a different century. I mean, they would laugh in your face. If I kind of want to see it, actually. I would love to see Vivek Ramaswamy's first meeting or any meeting with a Russian official and tell them that. I mean,
have it here first. Anya endorses Vivek Ramaswamy.
It's kind of just for the entertainment factor, definitely.
For the lulz, yeah.
Because it's just a very immature approach to the world. And it's not just the personal relationship between Xi and Putin, which is real. They speak openly about it. They celebrate their birthdays together. That's a reflection of a strategic decision that both China and Russia have been working on across decades, but especially over the last decade or so, to unite what they see as a Eurasian Eastern region that is more sensible for them to participate in, and they have a lot of wealth and resources and strength between them. And so for the U.S. to come in and not just act like a friend who would like to make mutually beneficial arrangements or work toward peace, to come in and say, oh, you can't do that. Well, you're already starting from a position that is aggressive and where no one is going to take you seriously in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I had to check quickly when you mentioned that they celebrated their birthdays together, if they have birthdays close to each other and what their signs are. Putin, for all those curious, is a Gemini. No, Putin is a Libra. Xi Jinping is a Gemini. Make of that what you will.
So, but what about the moon rising and
You're making excellent points. We cannot just go off a sun sign here. I appreciate your commitment to the specificity of the science that we're engaged with. I may or may not have already sent a couple emails out looking for an expert to come and join that bad faith.
We need the birth times. We need the birth times specifically so we can do a chart.
I'm looking for someone to come on and literally do an astrological analysis of all of the 2024 candidates. Fingers crossed that I actually managed to pull that one off. But going back to what you said earlier about Vivek, I have heard people say that he reminds them of Andrew Yang. I gotta say, I don't know that I feel the same way. It's not Yang that he's giving me big vibes of. It is Buttigieg. Because Andrew Yang, look, this is not a defense of any of his policy positions in the least, but he gives a very different energy to me. He gives more of a a little bit more hapless. I'm a tech kind of a guy getting in where I don't really have much expertise. His affect is a lot, I think, more kind of affable, kind of finding my way through the world sort of a guy than Vivek, who comes across like I'm a know-it-all. I am going to pull rank and authority. I'm going to tell newscasters on every single mainstream outlet that I go on that to the extent that they quote me, they must be misquoting me. I will lie to your face as you have the quote in front of you and tell you that you must have gotten the facts wrong. He's very domineering. He talks down to people. And the fact of his political trajectory being so kind of like created out of whole cloth because he's a sort of a media phenomenon is giving me big Buttigieg vibes. Did you see that people dug up that they both attended a Kennedy School IOP like a candidate conference back, I think in around 2003 or 2004, what would have been Vivek's freshman year of college?
Yeah, I did see that. I think I retweeted someone saying that this is a Disney Channel original movie and I kind of would like to see that. I loved the Disney movies from a little bit earlier, like the late 90s, early 2000s, and I can imagine both of them as characters. And
are they villains? Like, what kind of characters are they?
There's going to be some sort of play between the two of them. One of them ends up mayor of Bend, Iowa. No.
Yeah, South Bend,
Indiana.
Indiana. Mm-hmm.
What am I thinking? Yeah, South Bend, Indiana. And Vivek goes on to run a scam pharmaceutical company, and somehow they both end up running against each other in 2028. But they definitely have similar qualities. I think we can all imagine the kind of college freshman or Harvard student that would attend those kinds of forums, very ambitious, and maybe driven by ambition more than anything else. And I find those people to be dangerous because they're phonies.
I agree. Robbie asked me on the set of Rising earlier this week because Vivek and I were the same year, if I was also in the audience, and I said I was probably trying to find out how to buy toothpaste somewhere and auditioning for a cappella groups. I'm sorry?
Did you ever encounter him?
No. So I have texted the friend group since he's emerged and asked if anybody knew him. One of my friends who's South Asian and who did like Desi stuff on campus encountered him in that context.
Browntown.
Sorry?
Browntown. That's what we called it.
Yeah.
I'm half Indian.
Yeah. Okay. So he was in the mix in that context. But some other people are like, oh yeah, my friends are friends with him, and so says he's a great guy, that sort of thing. But me personally, I have no recollection of him whatsoever, none whatsoever. But the thing is, I think that a lot of people who are like, I've noticed a lot of like other Harvard graduates, other people who feel like they've engaged in similar kind of educational spaces, people who went to maybe law school with him at Yale, recognize him immediately. And I noticed some of the most visceral responses to him on the internet are from people who like see him as like that guy in class, the gunner who gave everybody else at the school a bad reputation, the one who was walking around talking about how they were going to be the next Barack Obama. To wit, him using at the GOP Obama's literal opening line about being a skinny brown guy with a funny name and thinking that like no one was going to notice, right? Or
who the heck is this skinny guy with a funny last name, and what the heck is he doing in the middle of this debate stage?
The hope of a skinny kid with a funny name who believes that America has a place for him too.
Right. And it's just that I can feel it. I can totally see that would have been what he was like in school. And yeah, it's just a very blatant phony energy when you, as you say, are willing. Are you mocking us by using that line? Who do you think you are? Do you think we're stupid?
Like, if you like Obama, then I get it. Then it's like a kind of a positive throwback, callback. But he obviously doesn't like Obama, which is why it was weird when Chris Christie called him out on it. I think it didn't land in the room because I don't know that most of the audience really understood that he wasn't just saying you sound like Obama, but that you're literally aping what Obama said. You're literally verbatim saying what Obama said.
I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up here. And the last person in one of these debates, Brett, who stood in the middle of the stage and said, "What's a skinny guy with an odd last name doing up here?" was Barack Obama, and I'm afraid we're dealing with the same type of amateur standing on stage tonight.
Come over and give me a hug. Give me a hug just like you did to Obama.
The same type of amateur.
And you'll help elect me just like you did to Obama, too. Give me that bear hug.
So much so that afterward in the spin room, what's her face? Marjorie Taylor Greene brought it up and said, "Oh, I think it's racist that Chris Christie would have compared him to Obama," as though he was just making up, as if he was just saying, "Oh, there's two non-white people on the stage, so he's like, no." He literally quoted Obama. That would have above Marjorie Taylor Greene's head entirely.
I was pretty disgusted at Chris Christie and his racist comment towards Vivek Ramaswamy, where he was like the only skinny guy. What did he say? It was comparing him to Obama. Yeah, I honestly thought that was pretty racist.
I would have just turned, if I was Vivek, I would have turned to Chris Christie and said, "I knew you would have gotten triggered by the skinny comment." I would have just...
Did you have any other thoughts about the GOP while we're on the subject, on those particular debates? I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy got a lot of airtime, and I do think that subsequently, as a result of that, there's been a lot of kind of hit pieces, a lot more exposure about the inconsistency of his views 5 months or 5 years in the past. And there's been more discussion about the scam that you alluded to, his alleged pump or dump scheme, which is how he made all of his money in the pharmaceutical industry. But in some ways, the bigger winner in terms of how much they gained in the polls coming out of the debate was Nikki Haley. Are you surprised by that?
Yes, I mean, she's another one where as a half Indian, I just feel sad that these are my representatives running for president. She obviously, I mean, what she was presenting was just the ultimate neoconservative policy of, well, very pro-Israel Zionist. The fact that she's calling Vivek out for not being willing to defend Israel militarily against Iran is absurd. And the fact that she and Mike Pence are both deciding that this is their major bone to pick with Ramaswamy, I think, says a lot about what's driving the opposition or driving the Republican Party that's non-MAGA.
A win for Russia is a win for China. We have to know that. Ukraine is the first line of defense for us. And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand is he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. Ukraine is the front line of defense. Putin has said, once Russia takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That's a world war. We're trying to prevent war. Look at what Putin did today. He killed Prigozhin. When I was at the UN, the Russian ambassador suddenly died. This guy is a murderer, and you are choosing a murderer over a pro-American country.
First of all, Mr. Ramaswamy, you have 30 seconds. Mr. DeSantis,
Nikki, I wish you well in your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon.
I'm not on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon. And
Boeing came off of it, but you've been pushing this lie. You've been pushing this lie all week, Nikki.
You want to go and defund Israel? You want to
okay, let me address that. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to address each of those right now. This is the false lies of a professional politician. There you have it.
Your watch, so the reality is, America less safe. You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows.
And you know what? The foreign policy experience that you all have shows in the pointless wars we've gotten into. I have to address that. So our relationship with Israel will never be stronger than by the end of my first term. But it's not a client relationship. It is a friendship. And you know what friends do? Friends help each other stand on their own 2 feet. So I will lead Abraham Accords 2.0. I will partner with Israel to make sure Iran never is nuclear armed. But you know what I love about Israel? And I've been there probably in the last 10 years more than most people on this stage. You know what I love about them? I love their border policies. I love their tough on crime policies. I love that they have a national identity and an iron dome to protect their homeland. And so, yes, I want to learn from the friends that we're supporting. And what puzzles me is, I want to learn from those and apply those to protect our homeland, Nikki.
Israel
that is the
needs
answer.
America. America needs Israel.
Okay, Governor DeSantis, you were mentioning.
And it's this commitment to the uniparty foreign policy agenda, which we have under Biden, and I think which Nikki Haley or Mike Pence would want to perhaps intensify, though I don't know if they could be as effective at it. And ultimately, what is striking about Ramaswamy, and I just want to emphasize one more time, is that while he's breaking with that in many ways, the fact that he is saying that he's willing to defend Taiwan militarily, and that is his strategic break with the pro-war uniparty. That is shocking to me and incredibly dangerous, because forget about what's going on in Ukraine now or what could happen with Iran if we were to defend Israel in some sort of conflict in that region. A war with China over Taiwan would probably be the most devastating war that the world, and especially the United States, could ever experience. And it's completely out of the other side of the world, out of our sphere of influence. Obviously, Ukraine should be considered that as well. But Taiwan, really, he's telling us that that he's willing to defend an island on the other side of the planet. The fact that all of his anti-war positions come behind that banner really leads me to question him, not only his authenticity, but what he truly represents. Are there moneyed interests behind him that are pushing him to do this, or is he an ideologue? I think it's something to take note of, because who knows where his career will go after this.
Honestly, my hot take is that he's definitely not an ideologue. I think that someone who flip-flops as frequently about his ideology and who seems to have created an ideology out of whole cloth sometime in the last 12 months can't really be said to be an ideologue. Someone who, if you look in their open secrets, and they were donating to Democrats not too long ago, and they said they were libertarian, but like it's just all over the place. I do think that, though, he benefits from the Trump thing, where he can say, I'm don't have to take donor money. I'm largely self-funded. He's given, I think, $7 million to his own campaign, and that's overwhelmingly all that he has brought in. That's overwhelmingly all that's in his coffers. But when you see him do something like take a stand against unlimited support and unlimited aid to Israel during the debate, which I agree with, and then immediately go on Sean Hannity, and Sean Hannity presses him on it because Sean Hannity is a neocon, who I don't agree with, but he immediately starts to walk it back and fold and starts trying to obfuscate by just really emphasizing how Israel are our friends and we support them in our friendship, as though that like is a substitute for a real commitment, which is to limit aid.
You know, you said aid to Israel, our number one ally, only democracy in the region, should end in 2028, and that they should be integrated with their neighbors. I have an exact quote. You want me to read it?
That's actually, yeah, I can tell you the exact quote. What I said is it would be a mark of success if we ever got to a point in our relationship with Israel, if Israel never needed the United States' aid. And Sean, you know how politics is played. A lot of the other professional politicians who have been threatened by my rise have used that statement to say that I would cut off aid to Israel. That's not correct. I've been crystal clear.
But do you?
That the only condition under which
Do you understand the importance of the strategic alliance, the intelligence sharing, in an area of the world where we have a lot of enemies, which, by the way, boggles my mind that we look for the lifeblood of our economy and the world's economy from that very same region of the world, and we have more natural resources here, which you agree. But you do understand how important that alliance is and
Sean,
how important the intelligence factor is and how important it is with Iran, especially seeking nukes.
I understand it, I think, more deeply than probably anybody in this race. I've traveled to Israel. I have business partners in Israel. The reality is this. By the end of my first term, our relationship with Israel will be stronger than it ever has been because I will treat it as a true friendship, not just a transactional relationship.
And why did you say that they shouldn't have preferential treatment? Why did you say that Israel should not have preferential treatment from us? That's a direct quote.
Sean, I understand. No, those are direct quotes from headlines summarized by opposition research fed to the fake news media. The reality is, here's what I've said is Abraham Accords 2.0 is my top priority. Abraham Accords 2.0 is my top priority, which is to get Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar into that pact with Israel. And foremost, to have a partnership with Israel that does something really important for the U.S., which is to make sure that Iran never, ever, ever has nuclear capabilities. That's important to the United States. So I don't read from the traditional GOP talking point binder that's handed to traditional candidates. That's true. That lends itself to being misquoted. But it's actually a much more authentic commitment to Israel on the substance than just checking off the talking point of saying that we stand with Israel. That's meaningless. I prefer substance, and that's exactly where I've gone in a lot of these long-form podcasts I've done.
You know, it demonstrates to me that there's no ideology at work there, and that despite him being largely financially independent, he still feels pressure to be beholden in some ways linguistically to the forces of AIPAC or whatever other lobby has such a grip on American politics.
Right. And look at the alternative Democratic candidate, RFK Jr. as well, showing that Israel's apparently the third rail, even if you're taking an alternative line on or an anti-war position on other issues. This is not, Israel is not up for debate. And the fact that Ramaswamy even did bring up unlimited aid to Israel, whether or not he walked it back, I just think is a really good sign of the times, because ultimately that is the only direction I think the MAGA movement and all the momentum that has come behind people noticing the unlimited blank check to Ukraine and people talking about foreign aid, the inevitable result of that, especially as I think our spending capacities in Washington become limited with the fall of the US dollar as the world's premier currency, we're going to be forced to confront those issues, and inevitably we cannot continue to give money to all of these satellite states, and the Israel question will have to be answered. Ultimately we're not going to be able to send billions and billions of dollars to Israel endlessly. So even the fact that it came up in a Republican mainstream debate like that, I think is a good sign of the times.
Yeah, honestly, public opinion polls demonstrate that there's been a huge shift, specifically among younger voters, attitudes to Israel. And even if you take the kind of more leftist view of being against U.S. imperialism, or the more conservative framing of we have to keep that money to spend at home, even though that's not exactly how it works from an MMT perspective, even if you put both of those framings aside, we shouldn't downplay the human rights aspect of this. Even if you thought that we should hypothetically support Israel, this is a position that someone like Marianne Williamson takes. Even if you do believe in kind of the Zionist project, you think it should be conditioned on human rights standards against in terms of harms inflicted on the people of Palestine. So I do think there's no putting that genie back in the bottle, and that's part of why we're seeing such intensity in terms of the fundraising and lobbying efforts against progressive candidates, any candidate that would take a pro-Israel, pro-Palestine position. People like Maxwell Frost, the youngest ever millennial president, getting beaten out of his pro-Palestine bona fides before he was able to really get into Congress. Ryan Grimmett in a great analysis of his very clear and almost explicit trajectory away from advocating as explicitly for Palestinian rights as he used to. Because I think they're scared. They understand that there's been a sea change, and I'm not sure that they've quite figured out what to do about it. But let's get to the meat of the issue. You referenced the end of dollar hegemony And that's a good place to start when we're getting into the BRICS update. You just got back from Johannesburg and wrote a great lengthy piece over at the Grayzone that people should read about the implications of the BRICS conference and the admission of a number of new countries into BRICS. Let us know. Tell us what we should know top line about what's gone down.
Well, just in terms of the news, and I can say from being there, I think many Western journalists were taken by surprise. I don't think they really believed that BRICS would expand. That was still a question for them. I don't believe that the journalists who were coming from the developing world had any question. The only question was, which countries would it be? And ultimately, we found on Thursday, August 24th, that the 5 current BRICS members built a consensus, 100% approval across the board to admit 6 more countries. That's Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Ethiopia. I think these were some of these, a lot of, depending on who you ask, these countries came as a surprise. Some people were expecting Algeria to be admitted. I think a lot of people were surprised that Ethiopia and Egypt were part of the list. Whereas I think many in the West were shocked that Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the UAE would come together and join an organization like BRICS, because we kind of view these countries as one-dimensional enemies that can never agree or get together. And of course, that's the way that we would like to keep them. Mm-hmm. But this is really it's what we're, in my opinion, witnessing is a revolution in international affairs, but also global development, because what BRICS is trying to achieve is, and what they have so far, is to provide an alternative model of development to the IMF neoliberal model that has reigned since the end of World War II, which is when we really entered this globalized world, right? And the argument of BRICS nations is that throughout that system, under Bretton Woods and under the IMF World Bank model, the developing world, while they'd gained their independence nominally from Western powers, were still subservient to the former colonial powers as a result of the IMF system. And that's basically written into the rules. Many of the countries, Algeria, for example, that gained their independence in the aftermath of World War II from the European powers, their admission into the IMF and World Bank were already initiated before they gained independence. And so what that meant was that they were pretty much already submitted under this system that said, look, you're a poor country. We have loans for you to develop, because you're poor pretty much only because you've been colonized for the past hundreds or tens of years. And so we have this money and we'll give it to you, but then you have to submit your financial policy and your sovereign government policy to approval from the IMF. And this has gone on for decades. There's a book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, people who have documented the way this system worked, where the developing world was free in name, but they were really still subject to imperial rule, whether through banks, transnational banks that are based in Western Europe, the United States, and Canada, or through corporations that would come. They would have to, if they were going to take an IMF loan, that meant they had to liberalize their economy, privatize their natural resources, and make sure that the West could still extract wealth endlessly from their former colonies. And so now, for the first time, those countries have actually reached a level of sovereignty and independence where they've come together and said, look, we are all different ideologically. Russia, China, India, Brazil, they're already very different countries. You can't really say that they fit one economic or political system. But they recognize that if they want to preserve their sovereignty, they have to work together to break away from that dollar-based neoliberal model of development. And they now can do it with their own currencies, trading amongst themselves. And BRICS is supposed to kind of consolidate what has really been happening over the last decade and a half as the United States became more aggressive with its unilateral sanctions policy, essentially cutting entire countries out of the international financial market, thinking that it would lead to regime change. All that it did was push those countries together. They're capable of surviving on their own, it turns out. And they started, because we were cutting them off from dollars, trading in their own currencies, trading in euros, trading in gold swaps, trading in oil-backed loans. And so they've been doing this for years, and now they're going to formalize this project. Perhaps a lot of people were thinking maybe they were going to come up with a BRICS currency. That didn't come. But now that they've admitted these 6 other nations, the stage is set, because BRICS now has a hold on more percentage of the world GDP when adjusted for purchasing power parity and the natural resource and commodities market than the G20 former imperial European powers do.
Yeah, that's incredible. So 30% of global GDP, 40% of global oil production, 1/3 of global gas production. It's basically a group that you cannot ignore from an economics perspective. We had an earlier guest who was here to talk about BRICS, who was making a distinction between the influence in commodities trading versus the financial markets, which are still very much dominated by historical imperial powers. But this is, as you explained, an incredibly meaningful development. I do wonder, when you say it was a surprise that certain countries, let's say Saudi Arabia, joined BRICS, why is that? Is it simply because of a historically, quote unquote, close relationship with Saudi Arabia? Is it because the United States still felt like it had more influence than it ultimately did, and these countries are no longer afraid of this unilateral sanctions regime or any other kind of strong arm technique that America typically uses to force people not to join organizations or take political actions that are disadvantageous to the United States?
A couple points. First, on the question of the financial markets, I will say it is true that SWIFT, the financial messaging system based in Switzerland, still does process all of the world's, or the majority of the world's, financial messaging. But they have, Russia, China, they have started to build an alternative financial network as well. And actually, this is all stuff that I write about in my book, by the way, because that's kind of the focus. My book focuses on Venezuela, understanding U.S. regime change policy there, but also Venezuela's efforts with Iran, Turkey, Russia, China, all of these countries that have come together to build this alternative financial system. I've been witnessing it up close for years and talking to the diplomats who made it happen. And so Saudi Arabia was the key entry into BRICS. This one came as the greatest shock in the West, I believe, because of, yes, the special relationship that Saudi Arabia and the United States have, and Britain before have enjoyed really since Saudi Arabia's foundation, but which it was kind of just founded as an oil company that back when there were warring tribes in Arabia, the Brits appointed one to guard the oil wells. And that relationship lasted to this day, merged eventually with the United States. But the key point to understand about Saudi Arabia is that the petrodollar arrangement that the United States has had with Saudi Arabia since the 1970s is the only basis for the US dollar serving as the world reserve currency. Essentially, in the 1970s, throughout the 60s and 70s, because the US had over-leveraged the dollar, it was originally based on the gold standard. After World War II and the establishment of Bretton Woods, the US dollar was tied to gold. We had gold reserves in the United States. We printed dollars and issued it to foreign governments that would exchange their dollars if they were using it in trade. Then in exchange, they could exchange it with the U.S. Treasury for gold, and that was kind of how we ensured the dollar had value. And after decades, especially after the Vietnam War, what happened was the U.S. had printed billions more dollars than we actually had in gold reserves, and so France, Germany, the European powers, Japan, they started to call back their dollars. They realized that they were kind of financing an inflated standard of living in the United States, or at least financing a war and a social state that they felt they weren't getting anything in return anymore. And the U.S. gold reserves dropped to an all-time low. Panic. The Nixon administration went into panic, and they unilaterally one day said, okay, we're closing the gold window. If you have U.S. dollars in your central banks, that's your problem. But we're not going to give you the gold because we don't have it. And the dollar was in a real crisis at that point. I don't think anyone wanted it until 2 years later, 1974, in the midst of the international oil crisis, Nixon dispatches his Treasury Secretary and Henry Kissinger, then Secretary of State, to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia had joined an Arab oil embargo of the United States in response to U.S. support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War. And in exchange for U.S. military equipment, Saudi Arabia agreed to not only lift its oil embargo on the United States, but only sell its oil on the international market in U.S. dollars. And what that did was, at a moment when the world didn't want dollars anymore, force them to maintain dollars in their central banks once again, because Saudi Arabia was such a monumental oil producer, exporter. Anybody who was buying oil needed dollars. And that system has lasted to this day, except for the past 2 decades, as the United States became more aggressive in its economic war, weaponizing the dollar, using sanctions against mainly oil producers, Venezuela, Iran, Russia, Iraq. What they've done is, by cutting all of those oil producers out of the dollar system, created a hole out of their own survival, in order to survive, those countries created an entire alternative market that I think now Saudi Arabia is realizing, India is the largest consumer of oil. India and China are the largest consumers. Russia, Iran, Venezuela, these other oil producers are all part of this alternative network. What am I doing? I'm just stuck with Europe and the United States, who, by the way, if I want to even be a sovereign country and I'm Saudi Arabia, I'm thinking they're going to weaponize human rights against me. If I do something they don't like, they're going to sanction me. They're going to cut. So I might as well turn. And so if Saudi Arabia is entering BRICS now, that is a signal that it may drop this agreement with the United States to only sell its oil in dollars. And the moment that happens, we in the United States are not prepared for what that means.
I mean, what will it mean? I mean, practically speaking,
it would mean that the dollar's worth, we're used to traveling around the world thinking that the dollar reigns supreme. It would mean that the dollar would not have value. It would mean inflation is what it would mean. And it would mean that we can't continue we don't have a currency that's based in any value other than our military.
Yeah.
And the fact that we force people to use it. And I mean, what it means that we need to start having a conversation here about how we as the United States can craft a sovereign policy to participate in the multipolar world and maybe have a currency that's normal, has value, and that we're not just printing endless billions of dollars to send to Ukraine and who knows where else. We have to start thinking fiscally. What's been going on in this country for decades? No one even really, I don't think, understands. I don't.
If the writing is on the wall and the growing frustrations of all of these countries, especially these oil producing countries, have been apparent for the last 10 years or so, at least, why do you think America seems to have been willing to charge into this? Was it not predictable that the decade-long proxy war with Russia and Ukraine would manifest in this kind of an outcome? That the diminished relationship with Saudi Arabia during the course of the Biden administration wouldn't eventually have some spillover effect? There's been a lot of discussion about China's very different approach to building consensus and maintaining good relationships with countries in the global South by choosing instead of a militaristic approach that the United States has taken, building roads, bridges, stadiums, infrastructure, et cetera. Not, I'm not saying it's just out of the goodness of their hearts, but in an effort to foment relationships that way. Instead, at any point, it seems like the United States could have taken a look in a mirror and said the returns are diminishing on our approach. Why do you think they have not changed course? What do you think that they think is going to happen as we're all sitting here watching BRICS expand, looking at what the ultimate outcome is likely going to be? Do they think they can just bomb themselves out of this problem?
It's a good question. And you said they should look at themselves in the mirror. I think people like you and me might think that's easy to do, but the people who run our country are so ideological. They believe their own fantasies. I guess that's a nice way of putting it. For example, John Bolton, you have John Bolton on one hand as the neoconservative, Elliot Abramses of the world, these people who I think Tucker Carlson described John Bolton as a bureaucratic tapeworm at one point. I think that was a good way of putting it. Like, no matter what happens, he will never get expelled from the swamp. You have Elliot Abrams serving in Biden and Trump's administrations after becoming synonymous with one of the most disastrous U.S. policies, the Iran-Contra, and criminal policies, the Iran-Contra affair, and yet he survives to this day. And then on the other hand, you have the Victoria Nulands, the Jake Sullivans. There's not really much of a difference in terms of ideology when it comes to the neoliberals and the neoconservatives. You may have people that are like Bolton nakedly saying we would love to be able to develop Venezuela's oil fields. That's why we're doing this. Or you might have the Samantha Powers who are saying, oh, we want to feed the children and save the children, and that's why we're doing this. But we're doing the same thing, and we have this mentality of we rule the world, and there's no possible way that these Africans and these Asians and these Latin American countries will ever rise up and take their own place in the world that they deserve as these rich cultures and also rich and economically and financially nations. And that was what I wrote about in my article there from BRICS, was that Victoria Nuland was touring Africa a few weeks before the BRICS conference. And according to a South African official who met with her while she was in the country, she was completely caught off guard by the coups that have swept across the continent over the last several weeks, overturning pro-Western governments one by one, even most recently in Gabon in the last week, beginning in Burkina Faso last year. Apparently, the U.S. leadership corps is so caught off guard that when they were in South Africa, this source said, in 20 years of dealing with the Americans, I've never seen them so desperate. They really believed their project for a new American century so faithfully that I don't think they can actually perceive reality. And they do have a colonial mentality. As I said, they don't actually view, I don't think, these foreign officials or foreign countries as equal to them or as capable of forming something without them. And so it's the downfall of every empire, right? Hubris. They've overplayed their hand. And I mean, at least as the United States, at any point, if we wanted to correct course, we could. And that's the thing. All of these officials that I speak to, whether they're from or part of these delegations, not necessarily officials, whether they're from Iran, South Africa, Venezuela, even Russia in the past, no one is thinking that they hate the United States or that they want to cut the United States out of the world, or that they could cut the United States out of the financial system or the world economy tomorrow. They just want us to behave like a normal country. Like, that's all they want. Stop telling us what to do. Stop weaponizing your currency. Just trade, engage in diplomacy. And I like to believe that there's a possibility the United States could still one day do that.
What gives you that sort of hope? I mean, there is obviously, in part because of this interest in anti-imperialism, you can call it isolationism on the right, that it is being mainstreamed right now, and by people like RFK Jr. in a way that it hasn't been historically. There's been some lone voices here or there, but it does feel like the idea that there should be an end to American empire, or at least some curb on American military spending, is very much out there. But it is still concentrated among, shall we say, fringe candidates who the media is throwing everything at, perhaps because they are mainstreaming this growingly, increasingly popular sentiment. So, what gives you hope that America might still change course? Is it that there does seem to be some sort of movement afoot? Is it that you think, the way the state capitalism sows the seeds of its own destruction, that it's an inevitability we're going to be forced to reconsider because of an institution, organizations like BRICS? Are you just hopeful? Is it the blue moon?
I guess I have to be hopeful because I'm an American. I think a lot of, especially people on the left, they like to just write off the United States, and they love the America empire. But at a certain point, this is where I'm from. This is where my family's from. I want what is best for this country. And what gives me hope more than anything is the people. I think that most people that I meet in the United States outside of the professional media circuit or political sphere and are pretty sensible and would agree with, they don't want labels one thing or another, but if you talk to them about issues of war and peace and economy, they can kind of all get, a lot of them, I think, on the same page. And it's really this top-down division that keeps people stuck in this feedback loop of right, left, Republican, Democrat, and because then we miss the uniparty. But we are going to be forced to confront the reality that, what you said is true because of, I believe, organizations like BRICS and just the inevitability that all of these countries, all of these people, the only direction they can go is toward freedom. I believe that. So we're going to have to get with the program. We're not going to be able to. And no country can. I don't think Russia or China will be able to either. That's what's interesting about BRICS is it shows that South Africa and India, these other countries also pull their weight. They're sovereign. They want to have agreements. And that's kind of cool. I wish that we could participate in a world like that.
Yeah.
Because the United States will always be a strong nation. We have a lot of resources. We have a lot of people. But we've kind of gutted our industry and our farming capacity. And I think if we refocused on the home front and really did have some sort of reflection, we can come out of this all right. I have to be hopeful. What else? The other side too is that's how I ended my article is, will the people who replaced Victoria Nuland accept the U.S.'s place in this world, or will they go down fighting? That's a scary, scary possibility too.
Yeah, go down fighting is an interesting formulation. Obviously, RFK Jr. being on the campaign trail has kind of reintroduced discussion about the assassination of the Kennedys and why into the discourse. He has argued that the decision to disempower the war machine, to withdraw from Vietnam, the post-embarrassment of the Bay of Pigs, a lack of confidence in the deep state, is what he's argued drove the assassination of JFK Jr. And similarly, his own father later on. People can debate how they feel about that. I know there's like a debate on the left as to whether or not JFK is getting too much credit for being anti-war. The experts can say what they want to say. But I don't think it's really disputable that people who represent a real challenge to empire do tend to meet untimely ends, whether it's any number of civil rights leaders or better than average presidents, shall we say. Let's just give them that faint praise. So, it's interesting. I have this pet theory that I've been working on. I don't know if you saw the counter-programming interview with Trump and Tucker Carlson the night of the GOP debate.
Yes, I did.
So they spent like the first 5 minutes of Tucker Carlson asking him about Jeffrey Epstein. And he said the reason was that he believes that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered. And aren't you afraid, Donald Trump, that you're going to get murdered too.
But it was just interesting. I read Barr's account of his time. He wrote a book about it,
right?
His autobiography, and in it he lies about Jeffrey Epstein's death. Clearly lies. Do you think Epstein killed himself sincerely?
I don't know. I will say that, he was a fixture in Palm Beach.
Yeah.
I don't know what Barr said about it either. I have no idea what he said. What did he say? He killed himself, probably?
He said he killed himself and that they were going to do this investigation. They never did the investigation. It's never been public. And they hid it. And why are they doing that? And clearly Barr knew. But why would Bill Barr be covering up the death of Jeffrey Epstein?
Bill Barr didn't do an investigation on the election fraud either, okay? He said he did, and he pretended he did, but he didn't.
I felt at the time that he was lingering on that sentiment a little too long in a way that almost felt like wish casting. Do you remember when Hillary Clinton said she wasn't going to drop out in 2008 because Barack Obama might get assassinated, and everyone was upset with her because they felt like that was
she was kind of putting it out there.
Exactly. She was putting it out there. That's kind of the vibe I was getting from Tucker Carlson. And then apparently he brought it up again on a radio show recently and keeps pushing this idea that Donald Trump is such a threat to the establishment. They've tried to take him out all these other ways, the indictments, the impeachments, that ultimately they're going to try to kill him.
What do you think the future holds? Is it?
I don't know.
I mean, are they going to let Trump be president?
No, of course. I mean, look, if, they protested him, they called him names. He won anyway. They impeached him twice on ridiculous pretenses. They fabricated a lot about what happened on January 6th in order to impeach him again. It didn't work. He came back. Then they indicted him. It didn't work. He became more popular. Then they indicted him 3 more times. And every single time his popularity rose. So if you begin with criticism, then you go to protest, then you go to impeachment, now you go to indictment, and none of them work, what's next? I mean, graph it out, man. We're speeding toward assassination, obviously, and no one will say that, but I don't know how you can't reach that conclusion. You know what I mean? They have decided, permanent Washington, both parties have decided that there's something about Trump that's so threatening to them, they just can't have him. I mean, they're putting him on trial in March of next year in the J6 case, which basically consists of trying to send him to prison for the rest of his life for complaining about the last election. That's literally what it is. Again, if this were happening in Moldova, the State Department would issue an all-hands-on-deck order to let the world know this is not a legitimate government. And yet our government is doing it. It's hard to overstate how bad this is. And I don't know where it's going, but there's a collision that's clearly imminent. And by the way, the president is senile in a way that's impossible to deny. Biden's not running the government, so I don't know, man. I've never been this worried about anything as I am about where this is going.
And I'm like, bro, I am not a Donald Trump fan, but it is it's a weird beat to be hitting. But I was debating this with Robbie on the show this morning because at the end of the day, I think it's weirdly inappropriate for Tucker Carlson to be putting it out there. But at the same time, I don't think there's any real risk because I don't think that Donald Trump is a legitimate threat to the establishment. It is interesting, though. It is interesting to be using that as a sort of litmus test of how successful a movement or a movement leader actually is if you actually think that they might be vulnerable to the ultimate recourse of the deep state.
Yes, it depends, I guess, on how assassinations come down, because these days I feel like, and what they obviously are trying to do with Trump, character assassination is the way to go. They can't, for some reason, all of those lone assassins and bullets stopped after the 60s. I don't think they can get away with that level of assassination now. Then you can talk to people in Venezuela or Palestine. There are plenty of theories about the cancer gun when it comes to Chavez or Yasser Arafat. There was a time when even a couple other Latin American leaders at the same time as Chavez, like Cristina Kirchner in Argentina, all had cancer. I don't know. Getting caught in the will there be an assassination of Trump? You can't win that, because I predictions I think are always pointless to make.
Yeah,
but
it was weird. It was, and given how Tucker Carlson has said he hates Donald Trump, there's a part of my brain that's like, oh, he knows what he's doing. he knows what he's putting out there.
I don't think he hates him, but
well, he said so in the Dominion, in some of those disclosed Dominion lawsuit papers. He says, I passionately hate Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think that, when you're friends with people and your texts become public, people can infer a lot from statements here and there. But I think if they hated each other, or if Tucker hated Trump or Trump thought Tucker hated him, I don't think they would be doing all that programming together.
You think so, Anya? I don't think that at all. I think that Tucker's strategic, and so is Donald Trump. I think that Fox News has never been especially favorable to Donald Trump outside of Tucker Carlson. The Dominion lawsuit disclosure showed us that despite having personally negative feelings about Donald Trump, he understood that Donald Trump was very good for the Fox News brand and was critical of other Fox News employees who were publicly critical of Trump, right? And that he knows how to play a game and was supportive of Fox playing the game of being pro-Trump because of ratings and money. And it doesn't strike me as implausible that he would continue to want to play that game as he's trying to build up his own credibility in an independent media endeavor. No?
Maybe. I mean, I think a lot. I think the Dominion suit, a lot of it was drama. It's the media like to create divisions and drama where there might not always be, but who knows? I've never heard a conversation or seen a genuine interaction between Tucker and Trump, but I get the feeling from their interviews that they seem to be on okay terms. But
there was this moment at the beginning with we should include clips of all of these things, by the way, so you guys can judge for yourself. There's this moment at the beginning of the GOP, the counter programming of the debate, that interview, where Trump basically opens by saying, Tucker, Fox News is terrible, right? They're agreeing about how bad Fox News is. And Tucker, he's like, yeah, you used to have a great, powerful, wonderful, big show. And now you're out here doing this little rinky dink thing.
Fox is way down, as you know. And the good old days are long ago. I will say this, it could come back, but they just don't have a lot of credibility, Tucker. You know that perhaps better than anybody. I think it was a terrible move getting rid of you. You were number one on television, and all of a sudden we're doing this interview, but we'll get bigger ratings using this crazy forum that you're using than probably the debate or competition.
And he kind of like, and you can see this look, like glance, I swear to you, glance across Tucker Carlson's face.
It's like that's Trump. It's like he did it's like how he called Tucker out for like embarrassing him in front of Kim Jong-un. That's part of Trump's, I mean, that's part of his style. He knows how to kind of pull his weight in front of you or make you know your place, or try to put you in your place. I think that's part of his strategy.
Yeah, he knows how to throw that exactly 215 pounds around.
But the one on the Epstein question, I kind of interpreted Tucker asking him that in his response and his way of interacting with Trump over that question was that he just expected Trump to give him a different answer.
I think that's part of it. But, Tucker's also very media savvy, and he is very good at doing that feigned innocence of, they said what? Wait, really? What? Why would politicians lie? Like asking a rhetorical question in that way. And so I felt like he knows that he can't go. He's too smart to know you can't just fight with Trump. You can't just fight with Trump. You need your audience loves Trump. You can't fight with Trump. But he does kind of. I watched Tucker. I think he's very savvy. I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of media savvy from the guy. But I saw it as them playing this like game where they know they can't insult each other openly because they're two of the most powerful voices on the right. But Trump is very sensitive, doesn't like to be insulted or disrespected. It was very public the ways that Tucker had disrespected him because of these Dominion disclosures. And I was maybe I'm overreading into it. People listen to the clip and judge for yourselves. But I sense the tension.
I was expecting Trump to give a different answer. I thought he was going to be all for Epstein not having killed himself.
But this detail came out later. as the conversation was unrolling, at some point, Tucker says, "But it was your Justice Department. It was your Justice Department that found that there was no wrongdoing." So I do think there's something there where it's like Tucker is tacitly accusing Donald Trump of not giving the expected answer because he is responsible. He's
protecting Bill Barr.
Yeah,
I can
read it that way. Exactly. And or also there's this argument that they were all friends with him, and including Donald Trump, and that they're all also protecting themselves. So it's I don't know. All I'm saying is I thought there was a little tension, and I definitely think that Tucker Carlson is trying to put a hit out on Donald Trump's head.
Oh.
Sorry, go ahead.
I feel like he's been speaking favorably of Trump, but
he has, but so he was doing the same thing on Fox News, even though privately saying that he didn't want to be. But that's just what was good for money. That was good for ratings. You know, a la Hillary Clinton,
because of like personality problems.
Wait, you think that he didn't like him because of personality?
When he said I hate him passionately, I thought it was like more just from their own like personal exchange.
I think that's fine. I don't know that it matters, right? Why he hated him. There's people whose politics I substantively agree with, who I don't like very much. There's many a leftist podcaster with whom I feud, right? Who I agree with on 99% of things. And I just choose to keep that to myself. But like you can dislike someone and it be for other kinds of reasons, right?
I guess I do think, though, just from watching Tucker's shows, that he's so concerned about this Russia issue. And I think a lot of people at this point really see Trump as the only one who's even willing to say he would end the war. I mean, we don't have good choices. So I've just seen him saying that he loves Trump. And there was that interesting clip with the Hungarian Prime Minister
Orban.
Viktor Orban, saying, bring Trump back so that he can negotiate a peace deal.
So if you were in charge of NATO, if you were, say, Joe Biden, what would your next move be in the war in Ukraine? What would you do?
Peace, immediately. Call back Trump. That's the only way out.
Call back Trump.
Call back Trump. Because, you can criticize him for many reasons. I understand all the discussion. But, the best foreign policy of the recent several decades belonged to him. He did not initiate any new war.
Yes.
He treated nicely the North Koreans and Russia, even the Chinese, He delivered a policy which was the best one for Middle East, Abraham Accords.
Yes.
So that was a very good foreign policy. He's criticized that he's not educated enough to understand the world. But this is not the case. Facts count. And his foreign policy was the best one for the world in the last several decades I have seen. And if he would have been the president at the moment of the Russian invasion started, no, it would be not possible to do that by the Russians. So Trump is the man who can save the Western world and probably the human beings in the globe as well. That's my personal conviction.
Like when you're hearing that from people, it's kind of, I can say from my own experience talking to foreign officials, it's crazy. The rest of the world, the way they look at us with Biden right now, and there really is no other viable option. And then to see the way from the outside, the way that they're targeting Trump is so extreme. It's very bizarre.
What do you make of the options on the other side of the aisle in terms of anti-war voices? Are you feeling any kind of way about the prospect of Cornel West's Green Party run? I mean, how are you feeling when you're looking at the Democratic primary? Do you think someone else is going to enter the race? Do you think Biden's going to make it to the finish line?
I see predictions. I just know that I'm going to end up saying something that's not true because I don't have
Well, what do you want to happen?
Well, I think what Cornel West is doing is great. I totally support his run in the Green Party ticket, and I hope that he wins a big portion of the vote, and maybe even breaks through as a third party candidate and wins enough that the Green Party and not that I'm necessarily a fan of the Green Party, they have their own internal issues, but just to show that it's possible for a third party to break through and have a strong showing. I don't fall into those traps of blaming him for having Trump have a second term. Obviously, I don't think that's Dr. West's responsibility. His responsibility is if he thinks he has a good agenda, he should run. And if Biden has a better one, then he should win with it. But
yeah,
he can't. That's his problem. But I was really excited about RFK Jr.'s candidacy. I don't think that was like a secret from my tweets.
Mm-hmm.
Or I would retweet him. I thought a lot of what he was saying, especially because of where I came out of the COVID experience. I thought his talking about medical freedom and his critique of the global kind of corporate takeover away from national sovereignty and from individual sovereignty, breaking down individual rights, but also national rights was important. And I thought his breakdown of the Ukraine crisis, I've heard him give really, especially in his interview with Tucker recently, I thought was great. And I think it's so important. And I think he represented a lot as a Kennedy to come forward and be making these points and talking about what happened to his father and his uncle and kind of having a reckoning with that period of our history and also what that Kennedy legacy means now. Which is why I was so devastated to see him decide. I mean, just regardless of what you think about Israel, it's weird for a U.S. presidential candidate to be promoting a foreign government or a foreign state. I mean, doing paid gigs. Come on, he's really going to tell us he wasn't getting money for that. Fine. I mean, I would really like to see an investigation there or some sort of just tell us the truth, RFK Jr. Who told you that it was a good idea to go do an event making the case for Israel? You're running for the U.S. presidency, not for Prime Minister of Israel. All right. So if you were doing that for any other country, it would be considered weird, just regardless of what you think about Israel. Now let's add to the point that he's running for U.S. president based on this anti-war peace message. Well, Israel is the most dangerous. In fact, a lot of realist foreign policy people in the U.S. establishment are frustrated with Israel because they see it as a friend who not only is draining us of our own resources and money, but always asking us to get into conflict in the Middle East. It's not in our interest to have conflict with Iran. It'd be in our interest to have good relations with Iran. It's only in our interest to be constantly hostile and trying to overthrow the Iranian government because of Israel and Israel's interests. And what does Israel give us in return? Well, I guess they give our candidates money. And so to see someone taking this peace message and then saying that they were going to be a loyal friend and ally of Israel, and then to see him attack Palestinians the way that he did. I've been there. I've been to the West Bank, and when I said I've been to Palestine, I've been from the river to the sea. I've seen the Gaza Strip. And once you've seen the people there, and once you see what they live under, once you've walked through the militarized border, and to see him also say that that's the model he wants for the U.S.
Woof. Yes.
When you go into Gaza, you not only walk through this huge military wall that looks like something out of a dystopian film, then you have to walk through a caged passageway up until you get to the actual street, and there's snipers all along the window or all along the wall. And as I was walking out of the cage, there was this farmer with his goats out just taking them to eat in the fields. And the sniper was just firing off just to get the sheep irritated and running around for no reason. And I saw that just on my own, the few days that I was there, the one day that I was leaving, that level of militarized presence and just suffocation in Gaza. And then in the West Bank, where people are just, again, in this walled off territory, where the guy who's showing me around and acting as my translator is this amazingly brilliant, educated man who should be working in a university, but because of there's no money to be made there, he couldn't get a job. or he lost his job at the university, and Israeli settlers had like raised and set fire to his olive trees and his family's farm. That's again just one person. That story is times multiplied by thousands and millions across Palestine. And he's really calling all the people who live in these neighborhoods terrorists. I mean, I got just way more worked up here than I expected to on this question.
And with good reason. And with good reason. And I think a lot of people felt, you're right, the exact same way. I remember I was having this debate on Rising, and Robbie was somewhat skeptical that it would make that big a difference in his support. Because I was one of the first people to press him on this issue in a one-on-one in a direct interview. And after the interview, I think there was some frustration that I sucked up so much interview time talking about Palestine. But I was perceiving legitimate, organic left support for him. And I knew that not just because there's like another issue, I like him on this issue and I don't like him on this issue. But to your point that these are integrated issues, how can you credibly be someone who's against U.S. imperialism in Ukraine when you have the view that you do of Israel? And that there was no reconciling that. And that would be the downfall of his chances, at least among leftist voters. Now, Rob, there was some question about whether or not the right would care and that it would substantively impact his campaign, given that so much of his support did seem to come from people who were independent/right leaning. But we haven't really heard from him since then until like this week. He started doing a couple more media appearances. I saw him doing a Jesse Waters sit down with conservatives. And I do think conservatives are always going to be interested in giving him a platform to the extent that it detracts from Joe Biden. That's not a criticism. That's just an observation of what their mixed motives are. And in addition to agreeing with him ideologically on some of these issues. But the left is, the left abandoned him. And I do think that it has had a demonstrable impact on his visibility and his support.
Yeah, I agree. And I think libertarians, they do not like Israel. They see also Israel as this, like, why are we spending all this money and why are we sacrificing our own interests for this state that is an apartheid, like, military regime? Also, everything that he says about COVID, opposing medical apartheid. Well, guess what? Israel, the Palestinians, they were the testing ground for all of that. Everything they want to do globally, it was what was going on it's what's been going on in Palestine for years. So, yeah, you were really smart to challenge him on that issue. And again, more people, Jimmy and Glenn Greenwald, they all brought this up to him, and he just didn't have any answers. It was just as if he was reading a script that someone handed him, and it showed because so much of what people liked about him was that he seemed authentic. He seemed to be speaking for himself.
I think you're right. Glenn was the first one. And Glenn was obviously enormously equipped and is brilliant and was able to push back. But after that interview, he kind of wrapped saying, well, I'll look more into it. And I think a lot of people were willing to give RFK Jr. the benefit of the doubt that maybe he was new to these issues. Maybe he had been misled. And then after Glenn kind of set him straight, he would be better on it. The opposite happened. He doubled down in interview after interview after interview. And it got to a point where just no one could dig him out of that. He made his own grave.
Yeah. And sometimes it was shocking, like with Jimmy, the level of argument that he was putting forward. It was like, sometimes it's hard to even respond to someone who's denying that Israel kills people,
it's crazy
on purpose. Like,
yeah,
it's almost like, okay, you're just on another planet. If that's what you want to believe, fine. Yeah. But hearing him say that really revealed a lot about him. And I don't like to be cynical. I love to be cynical. So I didn't want to be cynical about him, actually, is the sad thing. And now I just kind of am. I'm like, I'm sure he elevated his platform, and by taking this line on Israel, I'm sure guaranteed that he made a lot of money for his campaign. So if that's what it's about for him, great. If he wants to learn and try, and actually, I think it would be very important for a Kennedy to take on this legacy, because Palestine, it really will, you will be judged harshly. I think. Yeah,
it would make no sense when he was in the Rising studio and he's there with Dennis Kucinich, and I'm like, Dennis Kucinich knows better. Like, people around you know better. It's a mystery to me. And after he was very kind. I thought he was again, unlike Vivek Ramaswamy, he interpersonally, I find him to be very delightful.
Yeah, and I liked him a lot too. I find him, and that's why I hoped he would engage. Obviously,
my dude, my guy. Like, I'm like, I'm rooting for you like Tyra style, but you can't. Like, I would love for the left to have more options in this primary, but that's a red line.
I was really excited. I feel like I was even afterwards, I was like, how did I let myself go? Because I was excited. I promised myself after Obama I would never really get duped again. And I still want to believe that maybe he can change once he doesn't believe somehow that he's going to win one of the early primaries. I think he believes that.
Now I feel like I have to sit you down like you're one of my girlfriends and be like, Anya,
it's not going to happen.
I don't think he's going to change. He's 70 years old. He's been out in these streets for a really long time.
Israel, in a couple of years, I think people who really sided with Israel will see how wrong they were. The world is changing, and it's not working out in Israel's favor.
Yeah. Well, look, I've kept you here a long time. Before you go, I do want to touch just briefly on what's going on over at the Grayzone. For people who don't know, the Grayzone believes, I don't mean to say that skeptically. I just need to, for journalism reasons, say that PayPal has contested that this was targeted or purposeful. But there was a fundraising drive with $90,000 in it that was suspended because PayPal said that there was suspicious activity, and the Grayzone believes that it's being targeted because of the nature of its journalism, the adversarial, kind of anti-imperial, anti-blob nature of its journalism, and it's being basically shoehorned in as Russian propaganda and stymied the way that RT and other outlets have been, especially in the last year or so.
Yeah, so we launched a fundraiser, I guess about a month ago, just to raise money for 3 journalists who I've been working with for a while. Alex, I worked with way back in the day when we were both actually at RT, which we openly worked for the Russian government then, or for Russian state media. Since then, since I've joined the Grayzone, we have a policy where we don't take any assistance even from states, and definitely not from state affiliated groups either. But that obviously doesn't matter to our enemies. They're going to call us whatever. But yeah, Alex,
whomst amongst us has not been labeled a Putin puppet, really. all the coolest kids have been.
Seriously. So Alex Rubinstein, Wyatt Reed, and Kit Clarenberg, I've worked with them in different capacities, editing articles, working on filming and interviews. And so we wanted to bring them on full time officially, give them salaries that they deserve instead of just, fees here and there. And so we put up a fundraiser on GoFundMe, and it was a smashing success. We really had no idea, because we'd never done it before, what to expect. But suddenly these donations were flying in and went way over what we asked for. It got, over $90,000. And so we were in the beginning, we were like, is GoFundMe really, are they going to not? We were warned, do it on an alternative site, because you never know what's going to happen. And sure enough, after we made it over 90K, GoFundMe sends us this email saying, due to external concerns, our money was on hold. And so we didn't waste any time. Basically, because of what they did with the Canadian truckers, you remember, is not only did they refuse to give the money, they just kept the money and said that they were going to give it to someone else, to some cause. So the fact that was a precedent, and we knew something that they'd tried to do before, we just told all of our donors, ask for a refund, get your money back. And we set up a separate fundraiser on Spot Fund that we've asked people to go to instead. And they will claim, GoFundMe will claim that it wasn't political, but I don't know what external concerns means, whether it means external pressure is pretty much how I interpreted it. And obviously we know because, and Glenn Greenwald did a really great breakdown on his show the other night of the history of how these sites, whether it's GoFundMe, PayPal, have a history of coordinating with the government, for example, to cut WikiLeaks off from its donations and cut other. Now I also saw PayPal just cut off Miko Pilet, a great Israeli writer and someone who's a great advocate for Palestine. And Wyatt had previously had his PayPal cut, there's never any real explanation, and there's no recourse for organizations or people who are cut off. And it's kind of a metaphor or a microcosm of what we're talking about earlier with the weaponization of the international financial system and the dollar and BRICS. It backfired because now a competitor to GoFundMe has popped up, and now they're getting our business instead. It's kind of like how if they ban you from YouTube, then Rumble pops up, or if you cut a bunch of countries out of the international financial system and from the US dollar, then they're going to find an alternative way. And so, I mean, really in the end, I think people who stand for truth and people who fight for something better in the world will win either way. And if these companies want to play games with us, it's just going to be their loss.
I'm so glad that you're here to talk about these issues. We had Alex Rubinstein on the show recently. He did a great job talking about Niger. So let the people know as we close here where to find you, your work, when and where your new book will and can be found, and how to support the Grayzone in the light of all of this GoFundMe mishigas.
You can find my work at the Grayzone with an A, the GRAY zone.com. And I'm also on Twitter at Anya Parampil. You can support the Grayzone at spotfund.com. That's the alternative grassroots funding site that we've set up a fundraising campaign with in light of the GoFundMe fiasco. And as for my upcoming book, Corporate Coup, again, it's focused on my Venezuela reporting, but using it as a blueprint for understanding everything that's going on in the world. U.S. regime change policy, so how it's something that a playbook that is applied to Iran, Russia, Ukraine, many other places, but especially what it all means for this emerging multipolar world, how it came to be, who are the people behind it, what are the countries leading the way. I have some insights all there. And last I checked, because now it's out of my hands, I took a long time doing citations and making it just the way I wanted. Now it's in the copy edit stage. And according to Amazon, where you can find it, it's scheduled to be published in January.
All right. It's exciting stuff. Faithful, thank you for your patience. This episode is coming out a day late, but not a dollar short, because it is free. But if you would like to support Bad Faith Podcast, you can subscribe at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for an additional episode every week, which airs on Mondays. You're not going to want to miss this Monday's coming episode with one of the online left's favorite guests. And also, we appreciate your support. Independent media is constantly under assault. And I am so glad to be able to bring you guests like Anya here today for free. Thank you for your patience. And as always, take care of yourselves and keep the faith. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.